So let's take a look at some of the biggest, most interesting changes in Codex Tyranids, and talk about how they might affect Hive Fleet armies on the table. Hello and welcome back to Warspec Tactics, where I've been having a bit of a read through the new leaked Tyranid Codex, and it hopefully won't be too far long before I do get a review out on the book. On the way though, I thought I might just stop off and take a look at some of the biggest and most interesting changes that I have seen as I've been looking through. Maybe not necessarily the 8 top competitive choices, but these are all things that I found really quite interesting. Fairly big shake-ups compared with what the old version of the book held. First up we have a vastly reimagined Tervigon, which is looking like a far more tempting pick. Tervigon since the new codex have been a bit on the underwhelming side, they just don't really do enough for their points, and hordes of gaunts with flesh borers weren't particularly enticing at the moment, though of course that might well be changing quite a bit with their bigger high profile of strength 5 AP-1 damage 1. In any case, the new version of the Tervigon is up to 215 points, so a fair increase. It sees a lot of big stat increases for the trouble though. It hits on 3s like most Tyranid monsters now, has 17 wounds all the way up for 14, 4 attacks in combat rather than 3, and goes up to a 2+ save, again like a lot of the bigger monstrous creatures. It's got a bit better both at range and melee. In melee I'd probably go for the Scything Talons at either getting double attacks at strength 7 and damage 2, or getting a fair few attacks at strength 10 and damage 2d3. The Stinger Salvo has been buffed up to 8 shots, strength 5 AP-1 damage 1, but really the reason that you want to take this in game is to spawn Termagants. Previously you had to contend with the rather clunky reinforcement point rules for if you spawn the Gaunts, you still had to pay the points for them pre-game. Now it basically comes with those Termagants loaded in, so once per game you can just spit out a 70-point unit of Termagants with flesh borers, completely for free. So say if you were taking those anyway, you could assume that this Tervigon cost you only 145 points. That's really not that much for that massive stat line, never mind casting a psychic power and replenishing gaunts from other units in other turns. Admittedly, it's only replenishing 2d6 Termagants from depleted squads now, rather than 10, but still, seeing as you can just spit out some new ones, I think that's still a big net gain. It's also gained a Brood Progenitor command ability, allowing you to get +1 to hit with one Termagant squad, and that could let them hit very hard indeed with those buffed flesh borers. And they've also fixed the main issue that if you bring this alongside a whole bunch of hordes, it's just going to get shot by all the anti-tank weapons, because now if you're within 1 inches of a Termagant squad that's got 15 or more models in it, then the enemy can't target the Tervigon with ranged attacks. That's super powerful and could be quite gamey. If you squeezed all those Termagants into the bottom of a ruin, you could have a massive model that can't be shot, and it means that you could even potentially have multiple Tervigons striding forward at the centre of a vast horde of Gaunts. Certainly seems like a lot more tempting now. I feel just for its stat line and spawning that initial unit alone, you're probably doing quite well already. Next up, a really interesting change to the Hive Fleets is that now you get 2 different adaptations. Every Hive Fleet basically gets a primary trait and an adaptive trait, and Tyranid armies are allowed to swap out their adaptive trait after seeing what their opponents got on the board. Each Hive Fleet can draw from 2 out of 3 of these 3 tables that we'll take a look at in a second, and if they think that one of these traits would help them out more than their adaptive trait that they have at the moment, they can swap it out and hopefully give the opponent's army a hard time. Just as an example, Hive Fleet Leviathan's primary trait is that they can't be wounded on 1 or 2, or between 1 to 3 for synapse units, so they're really quite hard to kill. And then their adaptive trait is that they can re-roll 1 hit roll every time a unit either shoots or fights. Admittedly, that one really is quite good, but it is quite powerful to be able to trade it out for one of the traits on this table, just if it might be situationally better in your matchup. These ones are the different hyper adaptation biomorphologies on offer. Leviathan gets to pick from the hunt or feed traits. So say for example, if you were playing a melee army against a really heavy shooting enemy list, you could perhaps choose the feed trait that gives you no overwatch or setting to defend for enemy units. I think most of these do tend to be quite situational, or perhaps quite specific to certain armies. I feel that most of the time the rerolls will probably be better for Leviathan, but there really is some quite good stuff here. For example, on that lurk table, you get to count AP-1 attacks as AP0. That could really counter enemies that are going very heavy on the AP-1. And there's also one that allows you to re-roll Deny the Witch rolls. That could be genuinely really problematic for some armies like Eldar or Grey Knights or Thousand Sons perhaps. It's pretty cool to be able to flex out part of your core strategy after having seen the enemy forces. Next up, one of the bogeymen of the previous codex, the Hive Guard, have been quite heavily nerfed. Hive Guard with their Impaler cannons were causing lots of problems with the sheer amount of damage they could put out. They're now a heavy support choice. They're a fair bit more expensive and a little bit tougher to take out with toughness 6 and a 3+ save and 4 wounds, but their Impaler cannon really has been quite heavily nerfed as a barrage ignores line of sight weapon. Previously it was 36 inches, strength 8 and very general purpose. Now it's 60 points, only 24-inch range, only strength 6. It does get 3 shots, but perhaps most importantly, it only gets to ignore line of sight if the target is visible to a synapse creature, which means it's no longer the automatic bombardment thing that it once was. I still don't think they're useless. They have a few neat tricks. If they sacrifice movement, then they get to count as OBSEC and 3 models, and they get to ignore modifiers to hit if their target is visible to a synapse creature, but they also aren't core as well, so they're not a unit that you're going to be able to layer loads and loads of buffs on, and their barrage threat is a lot smaller, only having a 24-inch range. A bunch of the stratagems have changed in the new book. In particular, one of the ones for double shooting for 2 CP is gone. Again, that's another one of the slightly more game-breaking, crotchy stratagems. I feel like that was always going to be used in abundance every single turn, as you're always going to make a unit far more efficient by layering loads of buffs on it, and then making it shoot twice for relatively low cost. A few of the more interesting new ones, though, are 1 CP for Endless Swarm. Those Endless Multitudes troop units like Termagants and Hormagaunts get to replenish D3+3 models, which could easily be 40 points or more on the table. Pretty powerful for 1 command point, particularly given it gives you some movement shenanigans. For 1 CP, Scorch Bugs could also be really handy on Termagants with Flesh Borers. They give you +1 strength and an extra 6-inch range. Combine that with a Tervigon and 30 Termagants with the Borers, and you've got a massive 30 strength 6 AP- spawn shots all the way at 24-inch range, hitting on a 3+, and you could easily stack some other buffs on them, like command buffs from Hive Tyrants or Tyranid Primes. Pretty scary from the humble Flesh Borer, not exactly the sort of firepower you might expect. Tyranid Warrior's got a rather good one called Reinforced Hive Node. This one's 1 or 2 command points, depending on whether or not you've got 6 or more warriors, and it's a handy -1 damage mechanic if your unit's targeted. Pretty sweet now their toughness 5 are going to be excessively hard to shift. Finally, for 1 CP, if you charge in with monsters, you can use Trampling Charge. Really quite a lot of them have a keyword called Horned Chitin. You get it on most of the dangerous melee ones like the Haruspecs or the Hive Tyrant on foot. This one's a really powerful impact hit mechanic. You roll a d6. On a 2 to 4, the enemy takes 3 mortal wounds then and there, or on a 5+, they take d3+3. That really is some very efficient damage conversion. 1 command point for killing that many enemy models really is good. Perhaps one of the most radically changed units in the entire Tyranid Codex are Genestealers. It really does seem to be a bit of a mixed bag for the Genestealers. They've got a lot of powerful abilities, but also lost a fair few things as well. If we're talking negatives, they're up to 16 points from 13, they're no longer troops in the elite slot now, and have a max squad size of 10. It does seem that they're really quite different to the Genestealer cult Pure Strains though, as unlike the Pure Strains, they don't get to advance and charge anymore, and they also don't hit on a 2+, they hit on a 3+, even though admittedly their melee is really quite good at hitting at strength 4, AP-3, damage 1 with 4 attacks. You do get a fair few more buffs that you can place on them in the Tyranid Codex as well, so they might not be quite as directly comparable. Finally, on the bad side, you only get a 5+ invul save compared with the cheaper Pure Strains 4+, though it does go up to a 4 in melee, so you might well be questioning why they're so much worse than the Genestealer cult variant. I think perhaps one of the main reasons that they've been toned down a fair bit is because Genestealers can now forward deploy, so set up in the midfield, anywhere that's 9 inches away from enemy models, and also from the enemy deployment zone. That's really quite big. It's great for taking the mid board early and not having to rely on pre-game move units. It'll be very, very easy to threaten big first turn charges, and I think that Genestealers are going to remain a seriously spooky unit for opponents. They can take Acid Maws and Flesh Hooks for free. Acid Maws give you a stratagem that can deal a few mortal wounds in combat, and Flesh Hooks basically allow the unit to move up and down vertical terrain for no extra movement, which appears to be something that the squad's just generally going to be able to get to do for free now. Finally, another really interesting upgrade is an Infestation node. For 20 points you can take one of these along, and they can deploy it instead of moving. In future command phases, if you have Genestealers within 3 inches of that node, they get to replenish D3 Genestealers from the dead if the squad is injured but not destroyed. I have a feeling that that's not really going to get used very much, but it's really quite a fun upgrade, I think. I feel like it's maybe a bit of a weird side grade for Genestealers. They have lost quite a lot of things and are a bit less efficient due to the points cost, but gaining 4 attacks, AP-3 melee, and being able to access all the multitude of new Tyranid buffs available I think they're still going to be very threatening. Speaking of which, one of the Tyranid buffs that might well interest the Genestealers is the brutal looking Hive Fleet Behemoth. Previously, what they did was re-roll charges. They still do that with their adaptive trait, which you can swap out if you need to. But as well as that, they also get +1 strength in the first round of combat, absolutely great with things like Hormagaunts or Genestealers. Going from strength 3 to strength 4 or 4 to 5 is a really big deal. Their Warlord trait looks like you could stack that to make a seriously dangerous character as well. 6 hits to wound in melee, causing 1 extra mortal wound. That could be really nice on the new Trygon Primes, which have 12 attacks. And their relic gives them +1 damage to melee weapons. That'd be excellent on just about anything. To be honest though, perhaps come to think of it, also great on Trygon Primes as well. That would now make them 12 attacks at strength 7 and damage 3. Their stratagem is a fights and death one or 2 command points to make an infantry unit fight if they've not fought. Really good if you think you've got Hormagaunts or Genestealers about to get wiped out in combat. But I think perhaps one of their really big wins is their Unstoppable Onslaught psychic power. A Warp Charge 7 cast to hit something within Synaptic Link range, and it just casually gives one Behemoth unit +1 to wound in melee. Combining that with a +1 strength, that's going to be insanely dangerous on things like Genestealers or Hormagaunts again. Strength 5 Genestealers with +1 to wound will wound Knights on a 4+. That could easily have a full squad of 10 doing something around 12 wounds to Toughness 8 vehicles, let alone what they do to light infantry. It'll be interesting to see which Hive Fleets get most played, but direct damage is always good fun. We touched on Trigons a second ago, but perhaps even more fun looking than them are Mawlocs, which really seem to have got the ultimate 9th edition treatment, gaining about 1 million special rules, all sorts of profile buffs, while remaining at exactly the same points cost of 125 points, really quite throwaway. They moved to the fast attack from the heavy support choice, and their stat line is just insanely buffed. 10-inch move, hits on 3s now, strength and toughness 7 from 6, 14 wounds from 12, a 3+ save, and perhaps most hilariously of all, having a profile of 16 attacks, though admittedly they are quite anti-infantry attacks, all made at strength 7, AP-1 and damage 1. Still not going to do crazy amounts against vehicles, but this thing will absolutely shred hordes. To be fair though, even against hard targets, he's got another couple of tricks in his toolbox. A Distensible Jaw that hits on a 2+ for D3 mortal wounds, or if you roll a 6 then it's a flat 3. That'll certainly help out against hard targets, and if it slays any models, then they count as half models for combat attrition in that phase. +1 extra attack from a Toxin Spike Tail, an extra strike at strength 7 AP-3 damage 2 will help out. So kind of between those 2 extra very good attacks, you've got 18 attacks on the go. You could get Adrenal Glands for strength 8 for 10 points extra, or auto wounds on 6s with Toxin Sacks if desired. Finally though, his Terror from the Deep ability has been really reimagined. Instead of coming in from reserves, you place a marker on the ground, and 1 Mawloc can't deploy that turn. Then in your next movement phase, after your opponent has tried to scramble out the way as best as possible, every unit within 6 inches of that marker rolls a d6. On a 3 to 6 they take d3 mortal wounds, on a 7+ they take d3 + 3. You can manage to reach 7 by either getting +1 if there's 6+ enemy models in the unit, or +2 if there's 11 or more. The Mawloc then sets up within 12 inches of the marker, though if it appears within 9 inches of enemies then it then can't charge. Still though, seeing as it's built into the Mawloc's profile, that really is quite a powerful way to cause a fair bit of disruption and pile a bunch of mortal wounds somewhere annoying for the enemy. Finally, to round up, here's just 3 big army-wide changes. First up, Instinctive Behaviour has gone the way of the dodo. Previously that could make non-synapse units subtract 1 from hit rolls, or subtract 2 from charge rolls if they weren't in the web. I think it was a fairly evocative rule, though it must be said quite annoying if you did have your synapse killed. That one has gone away now. Synapse is now just an ignores morale rule, but I think there's still plenty of reasons to not want any synapse creatures to die. They're just incredibly useful for the army. Shadow in the Warp has gained a extra murderous little bite. It still gives you a -1 to cast when you're within 18 inches of Tyranid Psychers, but now you also take an extra mortal wound if you perils at all. Rarely going to be all that relevant, but just means that if you're messing up your casting, it's going to be extra painful if you're in the territory of the Hive Mind. Finally, along with all the regeneration, Swarming Masses is a rule on the Hordes that allow them to engage within 2.5 inches in melee. Should mean it's just a little bit easier to get more models into combat, and they won't be held back as much by terrain or awkward situations on the edges of units. As usual with these 9th edition codexes, it does really seem that Games Workshop have turned all the stat lines and rules inside out, and added a whole bunch of fun stuff to the book. In any case, I hope you enjoyed some of the things that I found most interesting from the Tyranid book. I think the next video that I drop should probably be the full Codex review. Hopefully it should be sometime within the next 24 hours or so, so feel free to subscribe if you'd like to see that, or just check back later. As always, let me know what you think of the changes down in the comments below. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page, and that's what allows me to make quite so many videos like this quite so regularly. If you are enjoying quite a bit, any support is enormously appreciated. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some really big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to check it out, the link's down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.